Hello, I'm Tristram Hooley and I'm giving a series of lectures for the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences. In this one I'm going to be looking at career theories which focus on the matching between the individual and their environment or the job that they might do, often using the kind of metaphor that we see here of the jigsaw, the piece that might fit in. If we can find the place where somebody fits in, then we will have found the career that is most desirable for them. Now, this kind of theory goes right back to the very beginnings of the career guidance field, or the vocational psychology field, as it's sometimes described. So if we look back to the turn of the century, now this was actually happening in many places around the world, and there is obviously similar activities that happened before, but really there was an upsurge at the beginning of the 20th century, most notably in Boston in the United States. And in that area, we saw lots of people coming from overseas, emigrating to the United States, but also people coming from the land as the United States was becoming an industrial nation. So we saw lots of people coming into the cities, and they didn't necessarily have clear jobs to go to. They didn't necessarily have skills that were directly comparable to the things that are going to be required to do in the factories and other industrial jobs of the city. So people thought, well, we need some way to figure this out. One of the most important figures in this period is Frank Parsons, and he wrote a book which was published in 1909, and in that book he says, "No step in life, unless it may be the choice of a husband or wife, is more important than the choice of a vocation. You may not be able to get into the right line of work at first. You may have to learn your living for a while in a way that is open to you. But if you study yourself and get sufficient knowledge of various industries to determine what sort of work you're best adapted to, and then carefully prepare yourself for efficient service in that line, the opportunity will come to you to make use of the best that is in you for your daily work." So Parsons is saying that there is a job out there for everyone. If you can figure out who you are, you're going to be able to find out what's the right job for you. So it's not just a question of taking all of these workers who are coming from overseas and from the land and saying we'll push them into wherever we need them. It's also a question of attending closely to what the individual needs and what they're good at. And ideally, that Parsons' argument would be that works for everyone, because we find jobs where people can really live their best selves. They can be really good at it, and they get pleasure out of that, and they also contribute more because they're really good at that job. So Parsons' method says there are three factors. So the first is a clear understanding of yourself, your aptitudes, abilities, interests, ambitions, resources, limitations, and their causes. Secondly, we need to understand the requirements and conditions of success, the advantages and disadvantages, compensation, opportunities, and prospects in different lines of work. And then we need to put the two together, the true reasoning of the relationships between these two groups of facts. So Parsons' method is understand yourself, understand the labour market and the organisations that are employing, and then put the two together. And he has various ideas in his book about how you might do that, but that's something that then other theorists have taken on further. But the fundamental thing that we find in Parsons still underlies much of what's common in careers work. Understand yourself, understand the labour market, put them together, figure out where you fit. And that's where we get this idea of matching. It's really very important to careers. Matching is described in various ways. I've talked about the jigsaw as being a metaphor already, but perhaps the most common metaphor is this idea of finding the round peg for the round hole and not having the square peg in the round hole. So the idea is that there is a job which you will fit into, and if you're in the wrong one, it will be uncomfortable and it will be difficult. Now, a few years later, John Holland, another theorist, picked this up and developed a new model. His model talks about different types of people, and he said people tend to act on their dominant interests and seek occupations in which their interests can be expressed. So again, it's fundamentally the same argument that is being made by Parsons already. What Holland does, and he really takes it on further, is he says, well, actually, we can create a scientific description of the types of people and the types of jobs that are out there, and that will help people to find it. So maybe you're somebody who's a thinker, a really investigative person. Well, if you're that kind of person, you really want to find a job that is kind of similar to that really makes use of those sorts of qualities. So by developing this model, these 6 types, the realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional, different types of people, he was able to give people a tool for helping to find the jobs that were going to be useful to them. And that then becomes a really powerful tool for career guidance professionals as well. And so what we end up with is tests. And if you're interested in it, I've got a link here that you can go on and take a test. There are various tests that have been developed based on Holland's theory. This is one that is freely available. It gives you 48 tasks. You have to say whether you like or dislike it. You've probably seen these kinds of psychometric tests before. These become very important to matching theories because the idea is if we can analyze jobs and we can analyze people, we can then find out who fits together. And to analyze people, we need some kind of career assessment, some kind of test. And this is an example of one of those tests. Moving on, we have other people who think about this slightly differently. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory of work adjustment now. So the theory of work adjustment says that yes, a correspondence between person and environment does indeed matter. It is important. If we have a close correspondence, we have satisfied individuals. But what the theory of work adjustment says is, well, both the person and the environment can also do things to increase fit and manage change. So perhaps if we find ourselves in a job and we don't have the right skills or attitudes for that job, perhaps we can work and develop and acquire those. Or perhaps our boss can change the job slightly to make it fit to us better. So the theory of work adjustment starts to recognize that fitting in is dynamic and that both individuals and organizations are in a constant process of change. And it sets up a model, which you can look at, I'll give you references at the end, sets up a model which helps us to think about how that works and how people manage this process of adjusting to fit in. However, there are a number of critiques of matching theories. So firstly, people, organizations and labor markets are too dynamic. Achieving a fit can only ever be temporary. So the theory of work adjustment is helpful on that because it helps to show how you can change when things change. But some people would say, well, actually things are really very dynamic and you can't really expect to find people a job where they're going to fit in forever. They need to recognize that there's going to be a need to develop and change. Second thing is there's many ways to do a job. There's not only one way of doing a job well. Maybe you can do a job through being really well organized, or maybe you can do the same job through being really creative. And so it may be that the fit between these things is a bit arbitrary. Another thing is that there's quite a bit of research which questions how much this idea of a good fit or correspondence actually explains in the real world. So you would have thought that if somebody is a round peg in a round hole, that you would necessarily see much higher job satisfaction or much higher productivity. But in fact, those kinds of findings have often been quite elusive. And I think finally there's a danger that these types that we start to create, you're an organized person, or you're a creative person, or you're an analytical person, or whatever, becomes associated with background or demographic. We start to say, well, somebody from that background typically is very good at this kind of thing. And the worry with that is that the theory then starts to be used to fit people into their place in society. And that is a place which is, in an unequal society, inevitably advantages some people over others. So that gives you hopefully a brief insight into these matching theories. I've got some references here for you to have a look a bit further into this. So in summary, I think matching theories are central to the practice of career guidance. They go right back to its inception, and they provide a clear approach and a scientific method for applying that approach. As they've developed, they've recognized more dynamic systems, but there do continue to be some concerns about whether they distort career planning by essentially imposing too simple a model on people. Thank you for listening.